evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Morbid Symptoms podcast. I'm your host, Tara, and I'm here with my co-host, Tony. LA. I for a while I liked Tony Funky Cole Medina, and now I like LA Tony. How do you find LA Tony?
I like LA Tony because that makes me feel like I'm fancy and
You're
bougie.
so fancy. She's fancy.
Yeah, I have to like add in my little humor here
I
and
don't
there.
know. Have you ever heard of Reba McEntire?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Oh, of course. Okay, sorry. Well, I didn't know you were uh, uh, into country or aware of. Well, I guess aware
well,
of.
she had that TV show growing up on Channel 5 for all those
Did
years.
she?
Yeah, it was called
Okay.
Reba. It was called Reba.
Oh yeah, but she also had that song "Fancy." This is one chance, fancy, don't let me down. It's about how a poor woman had to like get her young daughter, like very young daughter, all gussied up so she could go get a man with money.
Yeah.
How old Fancy was. I have a feeling Fancy wasn't very old. So, but anyway, different times, my friend, different times.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
that was frowned upon more so than before, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome everybody. We are doing the part 2 of what we started, I guess it'd be 2 days ago, looking at the do you condemn Hamas question. That is a fixture that's usually oftentimes, if not the first, one of the first questions that is asked of anybody who they think might be somewhat critical of Israel's response to the October 7th attack. They're going to be asked this question. And so we were talking about last time about looking at this, what's with this question? So, for example, why would Piers Morgan feel compelled to ask Jeremy Corbyn 38 times to condemn Hamas? He really needed Jeremy Corbyn to condemn Hamas and to not make it, not just an idiosyncrasy of Piers Morgan, but just as to, understand, like, why is it so important? Why is this question so important? And it's become like a fixture. And also talking about how this question functions. So we talked about how it functions to limit the debate, of course, because it makes it, you're starting off always with the implication of this question is that, of course, you have to condemn Hamas. Only somebody who is, beyond the pale could come on and not have this be the first thing that they say. So it focuses the discussion on Hamas and how bad Hamas is, which totally decontextualizes and removes what happened on October 7th from the 100+ history of that conflict, including foremost Israel's brutal illegal military occupation. And of course, a different way of saying that, other way is that so it limits the debate. So it limits it to what happened, or what first of all, what Israel told us happened on October 7th, which a lot of which has since been debunked or seriously challenged. So, and even today, we have to remember that we don't know, and of course, you can never know everything that happened in a situation like that. But the most crazy tales of that it was just some sort of crazy pogrom. They just broke through the fence and just were wanting to kill anyone they saw is not borne out by the facts at all. Or if you thought about it, it wouldn't be borne out by logic at all. So, well, the 40 beheaded babies, just propaganda. The mass rapes now that was day one as well, and that went away, and now they're bringing it back up again. Although some people who are not afraid of asking for evidence have showed that all these stories, it's basically still people talking about these allegations as if they have happened, but the people look into it say there's not been one direct testimony taken or a direct witness statement, like under oath or like in a private official investigation, or any material evidence, but it's just this kind of like a telegram gets said and it gets repeated and repeated. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if anybody was raped that day or not. But the idea that it was the idea that they're trying to put forward that it was a mass strike and that somehow this was part of Hamas's plan is there's been absolutely zero evidence provided for that. However, so this type of thing, but when this is the type of understanding that these people that are like Piers Morgan on these news shows or have of this is what they're presuming happened or what they're accepting or pretending they believe happened on October 7th, then of course, and if that was the case, then this question would make a lot of sense, and it would make more sense why they're so freaked out by people who will not come on and absolutely unequivocally, without any kind of qualification, condemn the raid that Hamas undertook that day. So anyway, so it manufactures consent in terms of how to understand this debate, how to understand October 7th, what to make out of it, what seems what seems permissible and kind of suitable for work, and what seems eyebrow raising. And of course, it controls dissent for people who know, who are just, have learned over the years that you need to be very skeptical about what the mainstream media tells you, especially when it comes to foreign policy, especially when it comes to Israel, the United States, and whatnot. And those who know a bit about this conflict, either a lot about this conflict or just some, know that this framing is highly problematic and extremely skewed, to an Israeli point of view, and also what the narrative that they want to have people fitting all the information into. Of course, it serves to silence you, because who wants to be called a terrorist sympathizer? Who wants to be called an anti-Semite? Who wants to be associated with the group who's been, if they come on and say, Hamas beheaded 40 babies, and then they ask you to condemn Hamas, and if you don't, even if you know that this is propaganda that will likely be debunked because it's just so beyond the pale. At that point, a lot of people, will be kowtowed into condemning Hamas, which just reinforces this narrative that Hamas is the problem, and the only thing that so if Hamas is the problem, then the solution becomes what to do about Hamas, and then which follows from that is what Israel is doing. Israel has to do something about Hamas, of course. We need to support them. So this becomes like a quantitative thing. Are they doing too much or are they doing too much? It totally absolves the situation from as Malcolm X would say, that you listen to the news too long, and that they have you cheering for the oppressor instead of the oppressed, so to speak. You're just so used to thinking of it in this way. And of course, if you have a population, Israel likes to associate themselves not just for the state of Israelis, but the state of all Jews. And if you can associate, if you can bring up, who have historically, of course, been a persecuted, oppressed population. I mean, the Holocaust wasn't that long ago, historically. And so it's easy to say that if you critique us, how can you critique a group that's been so put upon? How can you, they just are able to associate any kind of critique or easily, they don't have to, oftentimes it also allows this type of framing of the debate, allows them to get away with, not addressing anybody's questions or queries for evidence, but just like it's anti-Semitic. Of course, you don't think the Jews have a right to exist. You don't want Israel to be safe, and all these things that come down, just to fill the room, to give the impression over and over again that we need it again, that these types of questions are not what we want, and these types of questions are going to get you all kinds of flack. To segue into what I wanted to talk about with you today. I almost said Milton Friedman. I don't know why. Noam Chomsky's Herman and Chomsky's Manufacturing of Consent study in the late 80s, and subsequently it became a film. I don't know why I said Milton Friedman. Dude. Well, that's how neoliberal I am without aware of it. Milton Friedman just pops out of my mouth. I'm like, oh, Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so anything you want to say about what we talked about last time, or
no? I think we should continue on. To be honest, I think we covered everything we said last time.
Yeah. And yeah, the last time I wanted to jump into that, but we ended up having a rich discussion about Zionism because, I was talking to Tony about, I've been reading more into why because you see these rabbis sometimes who seem very, very anti-Israel. They don't recognize Israel as the state of the Jewish state, and so probably seems. So I was like, what's up this? I'm thinking these people seem to have a different beef with Zionism than people who are purely focused or largely focused on the Palestinian question. And so I was looking into that. So Tony and I got in a really rich discussion about the first Zionist Congress in 1997, and about how it was obviously part and partial at the time it was a modernization project. It was that one of the things they wanted to do, in addition to establishing a nation state, which was not something that was part and partial. At least that's the argument I've said. That nowadays people will assume that the Jewish diaspora as soon as the diaspora diaspored, that's a word. There's been a concerted or like an overarching collective understood goal of getting back and creating a Jewish state in historic Judea, which was a small kingdom, circa 900 BC, I think, envers, as we say in Netherlands, thereabouts. But that it was actually quite new, turn of the century. So 1897 was the first Congress, and there's a quote from Theodore Herzl basically saying that what he did at that conference was create the Jewish state, or the notion of it, and that he was quite convinced, and he turned out to be right, that within 50 years or so, it wouldn't just be an idea, but it would be a reality. And he couldn't have foreseen, obviously, the things that happened in World War II and World War I and World War II. Maybe not a huge surprise, but just the extent of it. But also the eugenics aspect of it, that they quite blatantly say now, because looking back at that time, eugenics was, a lot of people eugenics was quite popular. Eugenics was not a bad word, but there was a concerted effort, or there was a lot of discussion within the Zionists about making a new Jew, so the Hebrew. So they wanted to get rid of the old one that caused them that was the source of so much anti-Semitism. They didn't want to be associated with that, and they wanted to. So it was like a social engineering, cultural revolution project as well. Anyway. More on that later. I'm still reading into it. I do want to have a show just on that. Maybe we'll find someone.
Yeah, that topic is fascinating.
And I want to write a bit about it, just in terms of not anything like people who were been living who've been against this since day one, but just the idea that I think most people who aren't aware probably assume that everyone who says they're anti-Zionist mean the same thing by Zionists and are opposed to the same thing, and that may not be the case always. Anyway, so manufacturing consent and the Hamas question. Do you condemn Hamas? Yes or yes? First of all, I should start off, Tony. Do you condemn Hamas?
Do I condemn Hamas? No! I would just love for somebody to just say that like that. No!
No, you want everyone. Oh, so.
No, I do not condemn
Hamas. So you're pro-Jewish genocide then. You're for the genocide of the Jews. You're against Hamas. Hamas wants to kill all the Jews. So if you don't condemn Hamas, that means that you are for that, Tony.
How dare you?
Jews! right. Anyway, enough of that. Okay, so Manufacturing Consent was a book people probably associate with Chomsky, obviously, because Noam Chomsky was a public intellectual that most people are familiar with. He's like, I think he turned 95 last week or yesterday. I don't know. 95.
Shit.
I think he's 94, 95. Yeah. Anyway, and yes, but the book was actually by Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky, and typically, if whoever's name is first is the one that did most of the work, but sometimes people will flip a coin. Who knows? Anyway, even though this is associated more with Noam, let's give Edward S. Herman his due. But this book came out, I think, in 1988, and basically what they were looking at, they did a study of what counts as news. When it comes to how U.S. foreign policy is reported on, primarily, I think only in the United States they were looking at in this time, but they said mass media. This is 1988, yeah, so this was before the 24/7 cable news, and of course, quite a bit before the internet and all that stuff. So this was back in the day when you'd have, 3 news channels. You have ABC News and NBC News and ABC in the States. Maybe you'd have, and then of course you had the major newspapers. And that was the mass media and the magazines and whatnot. Anyway, so they wanted to look at manufacturing consent as opposed to like just general or what we think about censorship or kind of Big Brother, is the idea that in a quote unquote free society or with a free press, you don't have to have censorship regimes and draconian speech laws to control how most of the people will tend to see a particular subject. But you can do that through, with the free press and with market mechanisms and all that. You can kind of, what we'd say now is like, get your narrative, get your talking points out there. The spin, remember that when maybe that was before your time, when there was the no spin zone.
That was on
O'Reilly, yeah.
Yeah.
And then what was it? Fox News came on and said they were fair and balanced, which they really were. And because and this whole thing, but anyway, and just as a side note, I find it people will say, okay, well, even with science and in social science, but within so academics and also with media people, with news, like they think objective means 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
That one side gets 50% of the time, the other side gets 50% of the time, or that you have to give equal, so then everyone gets equal time. And it's like, and this is the idea that not all arguments are equal. So I'm like, you should, it's like I think it's about getting at the truth and what's the most truthful about anything, whether it be an academic study and paper or an article or a news program. And it's just the idea that, for example, just to use a non-political example. So if you want to say, okay, the moon's made of cheese, someone says the moon's made of cheese, and most people, of course, know the moon is not made of cheese. Would you give equal time to that to be fair and balanced? It's ridiculous, because what you're doing then is you're actually giving credence to an argument or to a position that should just be laughed at. Because if you give how we treat a question or an idea or an assumption or whatever, that is also how people's consent gets manufactured. Because even if it's something I don't know a lot about, we're social creatures, and we're also hierarchical creatures. So we're going to look to whoever seems to be in a position of authority or knowledge, how they're responding or reacting to whatever's going around. And it doesn't mean that we just are, robots that we're never going to have an issue. But so I just bring this up because it's not cut or dry in terms of fair balance, in terms of objectivity being the same amount of time. You should be objective about if what you're seeing and what you're hearing sounds suspicious, sounds untrue, or sounds problematic or not thought through. The objective position would be to mention that, not just to be like, well, this person says this and that person says this, so la la la, who knows? Or you know what I'm saying about because then of course it presumes that we in terms of the how things get covered, and bringing it back to the do you blame Hamas question I'm using as kind of a symbol for how the mainstream media has framed the events of October 7th in Israel-Palestine and the aftermath of it is, problematic. But they would probably think, they could say like, well, we're not going to give equal time to the other side because to them the other side's just so outrageous. Why would we give other time to people who aren't willing to first condemn, the terrorist atrocity that happened on October 7th or whatever they want to frame it. It's like, why would they talk to people who don't agree that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and therefore there's no reason to look into anything they say, go into anything they say or do beyond that. It's a bit dicey, but yeah. Anything, Tony? Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right.
I like right. I'm Tara. Hear that? Note it. Tara is absolutely right. So it's hard. There's no perfect way, I mean, it's just that. But I can assume what all of us out there who spend any time watching the news, who those of us who can still take it. I mean, like the news in quotes is that when you see somebody, when they bring on somebody who's, I don't know, who knows, some rich dude, some politician, some ex CIA official who's now their Middle East correspondent or analyst or whatever, and the person says something that you're like, okay, and they don't ask a follow-up, they don't push back on even the most crazy things, or the things that they have to know, or at least to bring up the other side. It's just like, what the heck? So it's like, I don't know, if it just seems that sometimes, both what I've seen at least, and this isn't just a left or right issue, this is whether it be liberal media or conservative media, if we want to use those terms. It's like they're not even reporting; they're just repeating. They're just like, it's like
they've really
a facade. So it looks like it's an interview. It looks like they've gone on to be interviewed by a reporter, but really, it's just a pretense to get out whatever message there is.
You're right.
When they tell you it's the news, you're like, okay.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I marvel at now is how much they've sort of created a sort of a lifestyle aesthetic that goes along with it. So not only do they manufacture consent, they've sort of mastered a sense of like lifestyle aesthetic. And by that I mean, like, I was dating this middle-aged woman, and yeah, and she knew I was she knew I was a socialist and all that, so there's that sort of wildness, right? But then she was kind of hiding the fact that she was like an MSNBC wine mom, you know what I mean? And then, like, when we would talk politics, I could tell, like, oh, this is all coming from like MSNBC. I would not ever say it to her, but she gravitated towards that, even though she was aware of like Israel-Palestine and things like that. She still gravitates towards MSNBC because it's like, it's a lifestyle aesthetic. It's sort of like this like polite professional, like, oh, these are the kind of people that she would work with. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and some people, and I used to have this on before I couldn't take it anymore. Is when I'm getting up, either when I'm getting ready in the morning, or cooking dinner, I would often turn on, whether, who knows, someone says MSNBC or CNN, or lately with BBC, or except whatever, just to it's kind of just in the background. But then it became a certain point where I was just like, I just can't take it anymore.
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
And the only thing I would want to watch then is the stuff that's not anyway newsy. So like I like the weather, like really, really local things, or like the cultural stuff, so movies or whatever. Because they would have people on there, and they would just come on and say, okay, so you're from the government, and so what are you gonna go tell us about COVID or us or whatever? And they would just say whatever they wanted to say. And then they'd be like, oh, okay. And then that would be, and I'm like, really? No. Or I think what BBC does, they have one or two people who are like the hard-hitting people, who like will ask a follow-up question or be somewhat oppositional, and then that means the rest of it, 90% can just be like, very okay. We're here for you to tell us, whatever. I mean, it was just, and then yeah. I don't know. I don't know when it happened because I've been aware of obviously how that what quote unquote the news is what a group of people with a variety of that it's processed, not just the news just comes down from heaven. Here's the news. I mean, some people have to decide what's the news, what they're going to cover, what they're not going to cover, how they're going to cover, whose points of view are going to be brought in there. Whether or not they're going to push back at all this type of stuff. And of course, like you mentioned, also the aesthetics, that's not just what's said, but the presentation and whatnot. So even though knowing all that, I don't know if it's got to a certain age where I just can't, really difficult. So now I'm more, I try to, yeah.
Yeah,
I got pissed at the New York Times a while back though, and I canceled my online subscription, but I might have to get it again. I don't know, just to know. So every once in a while, try to read The Economist, the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, watch a Morning Joe thing every once in a while. Like Hannity, I can't do Hannity. BBC's, yeah, that's a bit. There's some radio ones that aren't too bad. Maybe like Hard Talk or something. But anyway, I'm getting off the topic. So, filtering the news. So they, again, circling back here, sorry people, sorry listeners, going back on to manufacturing consent. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through these filters, and then we'll talk about how their relevance to where we are today, with particular reference to do you condemn Hamas question and all its cousins. Show us how, to the extent this is still going, if we can see these filters through that prism, or indications, I should say indications of these. So anyway, so they wanted to find out what filtered, what became, how they want to understand better how the mass media in the 70s and 80s reported on what they were going to report on when it came to foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, and how they were going to do it. And so they found that, again, that even, so the United States has the First Amendment, has a free press, the libel laws and the free speech laws historically have been quite sound, but now we're going through this weird thing where, since October 7th, the APAC and the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, are trying to get everything that's critical of Israel categorized as anti-Semitic hate speech. So that's going through. So far, Congress has made a lot of resolutions. I don't know how binding they are. My guess is if anything actually made it to the Supreme Court, that it would be have an issue, but we'll see. Because this is the same. The U.S. Supreme Court, just to backtrack, a while ago, I don't know when this was, in the 80s, when there was some neo-Nazi group that wanted to go have a parade with swastikas and all that, and there are people who wanted to say no, the city shouldn't allow them to do this, and actually made it to the Supreme Court, I think, and the decision was, that it's also for speech that we don't like. It's also for speech that we may even hate, but that in and of itself, if a group of people wants to march down a public street with a swastika flag, they couldn't find anything in the Constitution or jurisprudence that would justify them saying that's something they could constrain freedom of speech, constrain people's speech for. And bring up Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky actually was in defense of that. He was against the people who wanted to ban them, not allow this neo-Nazi group from having their parade. And of course, Noam Chomsky is no fan of neo-Nazis, but he is historically big on civil liberties and the Bill of Rights and all of that.
Right.
Anyway, so they wanted to look at that. So they found 3 filters that process. So if you think about for the context of this book, so you think about foreign policy reporting, in the United States. It's in the 80s, but you can think about now because this is still good. I would say that their filters are still alive and well. So you have all the information, all the things that you could cover or look into when it comes to foreign policy, and all of that has to get filtered into what we see, and the TV and the news programs or in the newspapers and magazines at this time. And today we'd have to, of course, add the internet online content. So how do those decisions get made? Now, if we're very idealistic and and naive, we'd say, well, reporters want to get at the truth. Yeah, they want to find out what's going on. And of course, there's also things they're supposed to be a check on power. Yeah, so that they're supposed to be critical of not take just what especially powerful institutions, with these state or corporate institutions, say at face value. They're supposed to look into it, and they're supposed to be like the fourth estate, and this idea that democracy only works if you have an informed public, and on and on and on. So the idea, well, of course, the reporters decide, and with their experience. Uh-oh, what was that? Did you hear that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a motor. Let me close my windows. I'm sorry. That was a motorcycle.
I thought the alien invasion had started. I was waiting for someone to come up and you just to explode or something.
That was some guy driving in a motorcycle.
Anyway, yeah, I was like, that was a random. Anyway, okay, I'm glad Tony's still alive. I thought I thought the end was near. I thought I was gonna have to go and turn on BBC or CNN to find out what's going on. Anyway, yeah. So let's see what you think. So if you have to think, how would you? Just like when you think about all the things that could end up on the quote unquote news, and then what points of view they're going to include or not include. How would you think if you just had to guess, based on your 31 years on this planet? How do you think? How do you think they filter that? How do you think they go through all that stuff to wind up at the news?
I think it's the editorial board now, and probably that the essentially that the newsroom in the contemporary context is no longer a sort of place where journalists are sort of freelancing and sort of bringing stories to their editor. Mm-hmm. It's more so that the editor has a set sort of perhaps a script that the editor has gone over with maybe corporate sponsors, ownership, on what exactly will be conveyed through reports that these journalists provide. You know what I mean? So an example of that locally, I watch KTLA, mm-hmm. and KTLA Channel 5 News. So they have a very when you watch them, they toe the line without ever giving voice to sort of an assumption that they would be on the left or anything like that. Yeah. So they toe the line between respectability and civility and this corporate aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So they had on Susan Sarandon's ex-husband. I forget what that actor. Tim Robbins, right? Yeah. Okay, so he's on the left. So so they're interviewing him. This is live on TV. This is a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. They're interviewing him live on TV, and he's talking about a play that he's written that's going to be performing, I think, at the local playhouses here in LA. Mm-hmm. And he openly says, "Oh yes, it's about a worker overthrowing a bourgeois factory owner." And then the whole panel, all of the anchors on the set, they all went quiet. They all went quiet, looked at each other, and they're like, "Oh, okay, let's wrap this up." Literally. So
that's that's some old school language as well. So it's you don't often hear like, the workers are going to revolt against the bourgeois owner. Like what?
Yeah, it was actually
They
pretty.
might have been like, we don't know. They might have been just like, what? I don't know what to say to that.
No, they did know what they knew what he meant, because they all looked at him like, oh crap, he's going off script. You know what I mean? And so they quickly ended the segment. So it was just like, okay, let's.
Man talking like a poor man.
Yeah.
Why is the rich man talking like the poor man?
So I definitely think the editor, right? So I think how it,
Sorry, I just wanted to say that, of course, I'm aware that the working class is workers.
Right.
A lot of working poor now. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So I definitely think, like, in the contemporary context, that's how it starts. Like, the editor has a set sort of like script almost, and you have to play into that through. So like you have to play in through it through the language also that you use. So when police kill someone here, the news ladies will say an officer involved shooting. They never say a cop shot somebody. They just say officer involved. That's literally what they say. Like, so they always have to confine themselves within that sort of like policy, memo, script, whatever it may be. So,
well, yeah, I mean,
I think that's what happens, right?
I would say, but that point is probably maybe actually careful, because you say that an officer involved shooting. If that's all you know, if they keep on saying, I mean,
that's all they say.
Well, yeah, I don't have a problem with that statement, actually, an officer involved shooting, unless it becomes totally,
Well, they
if the tape comes out and you're like, well, okay, this seems to be an officer involved homicide, or
right. Well, they utilize that. Yeah, they utilize that language to sort of weaponize it against like criticism and questioning. So like they also, like, when they cover local issues, like local labor issues and stuff like that, they'll give like maybe 5 seconds to like a nursing union or something like that, but they give the rest of the segment to like the landlords or the bosses.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so cool. So let's see. Like, well, so let's see what Herman and Chomsky have to say. And this is, I just have a bit of I'm just going to say a bit about each of these five. Well, I think what I'll do is I'll say a little bit about these five filters, but I'll do one, and then we'll stop and have a bit of a talk about whatever we want to talk about, and then I'll move on to the second and third and whatnot.
Yeah.
Because I don't have I didn't plot a lot of things, but anyway. So Herman and Chomsky in 1988's Manufacturing Consent studied how mass media determines what counts as the news when reporting on U.S. foreign policy. And like I mentioned before, they found five main filters that together determine what gets in, what gets included and how it gets included. So the first one was ownership. It also deals with scale and profit. So they noted that the shift from smaller scale local media charging enough to cover costs to large firms owned by a few holding companies focused on profits, of course, filters the news. And this makes sense that if news, the extent that news is not just to break even or to cover expenses and maybe have a bit of a profit, but is geared towards profit, that of course is going to have an effect on what gets covered and how, and to the extent it gets covered, how much coverage it gets. Reporters dependent, so local media cannot, and same thing is that local media cannot compete with either. So we have a lot of, and this is, they noticed back in the 1980s, which has only gotten better. So you have lots of things close and merge. So a lot of local newspapers and local TV channels can't compete with the larger entities because they operate at scale, and so they get either go out of business or they get merged. And then these reporters depend on media that caters to national audiences, are less likely to cover local events and stories, or local opinions and perceptions that don't fit into whatever how something is being covered nationally, very nationally. If you think about this, it makes sense. So how you're going to cover something at the LA level or in a region of LA is different than how you're going to talk about at the California level, at the level of the U.S. or the level of the West or globally.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the idea that you get that not just with the shift from covering costs to profit, to an overt profit motive, but just the scale as well changes the types of things that are going to be reported, and also the kind of discourse or the audience they're being pitched to. Because if you want to talk about something that's going to relate to a quote unquote national audience, and it can't be too in the weeds, something that only someone from LA or California is going to be able to pick up on at all.
Right.
So a corporate-owned media. Okay, so here we go. A corporate-owned free press is a contradiction in terms, as employees are materially averse to angering or embarrassing their employer. Most media owners are typically engaged in other businesses and do not have a background in journalism. For example, Jeff Bezos, the founder and former CEO of Amazon, purchased the Washington Post. Employee-employee relations, we can imagine, are going to filter what Amazon and Bezos-related stories, for just one example, are inclined to publish, or if they publish them, to actively promote. And I think this is something else, the idea that, of course, even if you have a corporately owned, if you have a for-profit media company that has, so a concentration of that, they still have the brand, they still have to try to pretend or present themselves or think of themselves as still upholding the values of freedom of the press and journalism and all that stuff. So, but it's the idea that, so what, it might not be so overt, but it could be like, okay, it would be weird for the Washington, like something really goes down on Amazon, it'd be weird for them not to cover it at all. But if they cover it and it's like on the 5th page or just a blurb, or, kind of, rather than stuff that gets covered constantly and consistently across all platforms and mediums for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they also talked about how, so that was newspapers, but also broadcast news has also become profit oriented. So apparently news programs used to be willingly ran at a loss by broadcasting companies. So back in the day, there was still this idea about public good. So for in the United States, so ABC and NBC or CBS or whatever, those are the three main broadcast networks. When they were writing this book, they realized that the news is important, and so they weren't expecting the news to be the big driver of revenue. They expected revenue coming in from their entertainment and sports programs to cover the costs of the news. But now the industry to subsidize the news. So entertainment division would subsidize the news. That was just kind of like just expected. But now the industry considers it malpractice not to organize and offer the news in ways that generate a profit whenever possible. So profit dictates the stories and type of coverage. So combative or sensational that get the most attention. So ratings, clicks, or shares, we bring it up to date into the internet. Social media and the online media are valued over what is most informative or socially pressing. So, and I think that this also goes into so if we think about, to just use Piers Morgan as an example, and him pressing combatively Jeremy Corbyn to just utter the phrase, "I condemn Hamas." Now, is that informative? No. Is it combative and sensational, and does it get clicks, and does it appeal to other people, this kind of your side, my side type of thing? Yes. Does it get more ratings? Yeah, that's why that's the clip he's going to show. It's not like they're like, here's this great conversation we had about, the ins and outs of the settlement policy. It's like, look at how I pressed, look at me, I pressed Jeremy Corbyn 38 times and he still wouldn't answer if he condemned Hamas, blah, 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 blah. So that I think kind of figures into it as well. Anything you want to? So to me, this has only gotten more so since 1988 when they wrote this. So the media has gotten more concentrated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more, the scale's only gotten larger. The profit, of course, the profit motive is right there.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, you don't really get, there's some information, but most of us, if we watch that, if we're honest with ourselves and we think about it, like, okay, am I being informed or am I being entertained? or pacify, you know.
Yeah, you're right. I do have some comments on. I have some comments more so on the next source on sources and employees, because what you said made me immediately think to the sources
Don't
and
jump ahead, man. Don't jump ahead.
yeah.
We'll
you
get
know,
there. We'll
yeah,
get there. I'll have the revenue model because that's, of course, a part of it. So
yeah.
they
It
also
makes me think. I would love to. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. It makes me think. I would love to ask some of these news people how much is it actually to run a newsroom in the 2020s? Like how it must like for them to have to be underwritten so much by corporations and individual wealthy people. It makes me wonder like what exactly is the cost to running a newsroom? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know, because I also know that there's people talk about how remember there used to be these things called foreign correspondents. Remember this?
Yeah,
So there'd be people who'd be based, they'd have bureau offices.
right.
So they'd have office. So like if you're the New York Times, you would have correspondents in the, throughout the Middle East and Africa, everywhere. You'd also have, business correspondents and labor corps, all these kinds of things. And their job would be to not just scour the internet or social media to see who's saying what um, and who to interview, but they would have their contacts. Yeah, they'd be regularly in touch with various people in the places or the sectors that they were covering.
Right.
And so they had, of course, a lot of, and of course, if you have that, people are able to sniff out things. I don't know if that's a technical term, but they can hear something and be like, that seems, people that have institutional knowledge or know how to read between the lines when if the CIA says something or MI6 says something or Israel says, the Ministry of the Interior says something or the Goldman
Right.
Sachs says something. So
Yeah,
they have this kind of this knowledge of the area, either the sector and the geographical area in which they cover, and that because they rely, I think, a lot on just what's trending on social media, or they get a lot of and we see a lot of this, that the same stories get circulated, and maybe somebody adds a little bit of something. But if they're just referencing each other, it becomes completely self-referential, and we get an opinion that these things are being collaborated or checked out by several different sources, and it could just be that no, they're just they're just citing each other. So the New York Times said this, the Washington Post said this, Channel 5 News said this, and then you realize if you go into well, they're all basing it off the same one dude who said one thing.
right.
And I don't know. And sometimes I get the idea that it's not so that maybe they don't have so many times people fact checking or doing background. I don't know, more so than they just have lawyers. They're just concerned about, okay, we don't want to get sued. So is this something that's going to get us sued or not? Rather than is this something that's been checked out? I don't know, because some of the stuff that you hear on the news, you're like, if I know that that's highly suspect, you'd think somebody there would have at least to ask, has this been verified? Has this been corroborated? Is this just opinion, or is there something going on here? Is it an accusation, or is there ground in fact? I don't know, but it just seems that with the speed as well, that I don't know what they spend their money on. Of course, they're gonna want to get as my guess is they probably spend the most money on people on the media personalities that get the ratings, not so much on the behind the scenes stuff about digging in and getting the information and double checking and checking sources or all that stuff. My guess is that's kind of a dying, or that's in risk. I mean, that's also what Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi and other people say, that that's kind of investigative journalism, actual investigative journalists who go deep into a topic or an issue, along with foreign correspondents, are just in this model that Herman and Chomsky noted in the late 80s. It's just gotten more centralized and more profit focused and more about likes and ratings and clicks. than information and debate, like meaningful. Yeah, I just think it's gotten more, but I don't know. I'm sure there's people. I'm sure that I would assume, who knows anymore what people actually. I shouldn't assume what people study. I know there are media studies programs and researchers, so maybe this is something that I'm sure it's something that people are studying. The degree that things have been centralized, and how if somebody has gone in behind the scenes and look at how are these newsrooms structured, and what kind of positions are there, and what are they doing, and how much of it is looks very little, and how much it just looks like the same thing you'd see behind a television program, a sitcom.
Right.
Is it the same as is that being produced the same way as Morning Joe?
Actually,
so what's the difference between Morning Joe? What's a popular sitcom now?
I would know.
They're streaming. What do they call? Do they even call them that? They're on Netflix, sitcoms.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know, to be honest. But yeah, you're right.
Because the last how old am I? I think the last then there would be 22 minutes. It'd be like a 20-minute sitcom. So it'd be half an hour, but there'd be 2 commercial breaks.
Right.
Last one I looked at, I think it was probably Big Bang Theory.
Ah, okay.
Probably.
Yeah, and I definitely think you're onto something, because
most of the things. This is totally off topic, but most of the stuff I watch on when I do watch, Netflix or whatever is usually it's like 40. It would be like the 40 or a minute or an hour episodic shows. I don't know. Anyway, the Blacklist, yeah, which ended. What a cult. I knew they were going to screw us on that ending, people. Once you got the Blacklist, you knew they weren't going to tell us who he was, just because then they can make us feel bad. Like, well, what does it matter who he is? He is whoever you think he is. They're not going to answer that question, and they did not. And I have to tell you that last couple scenes were phoned in. Oh well. Sorry. Anyway, sorry. Tony, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I think that's now a segue into sort of the sources and the employees.
Okay, well, the revenue model is a bit different. This is related, but let's see.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're profit oriented doesn't tell us much about how they get their sources of their money. So advertisers finance mass media outlets much more so than watchers or readers. So now this might be this is kind of turning around a bit in terms of alternative media, where you have subscription models. Yeah. This is the cost to consumer, but in terms of, again, they're writing in the 1988, so this is before Substack or podcasts or any of that. Advertisers, okay, so this keeps the cost to consumers low to free, because the consumer's attention is the product. The news is the lure. Under this revenue model, it becomes self-defeating to cover what advertisers find problematic. And this is my summary of what they said. This is not their exact words. This is my sum up. The news is the lure. Okay, under this revenue model, it becomes self-defeating to cover what advertisers find problematic and lucrative to select content that solicits the most attention from the cohorts advertisers will pay the most to reach. So advertisers usually don't want to reach everybody. Yeah, there's core. I think there's core demographics advertisers want to reach. So if you have an advertiser who wants to reach a certain age group or a certain geographic, who knows how parsing they do now? I don't know how that they do it. Then of course that's going to filter in. You're going to cover stuff that's going to bring in that advertising cohort, not what you think the JQ or John Q or Mary Q public needs to know about a particular issue, or which issues are most important to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and this is important to keep in mind. This has been I don't know who first said this, but the idea that if something is free, then you are the product. Yeah. So now that when something is free, either your attention or your free labor. So you can pay to use Twitter, but you can use it for free. And of course, Twitter needs people to post and people to like and people to scroll and all this stuff, or else there wouldn't be any reason for people to, But it's the idea that when, because TV used to be free, or TV still can be free, I mean, regular TV. That's because the advertisers are paying the whoever they're paying to get access to you, so they can sell you their stuff or tell you what they want, whatever it is they want you to. So they would say that, and this of course has not been really fleshed out. They're just kind of hoping that this notion that the values of a free and fair press can somehow withstand or haven't been consistently, progressively perverted or corrupted by when the outlets that they work for or have to access, for the means of producing the news and disseminating the news, are become for profit and based largely on advertising dollars. So these are so this is another filter that they found is going to obviously have an impact on what's covered and how it's covered. Any question about anything to add to that before we move on to sourcing and staff?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's not necessarily surprising that would be the direct model, considering that television, when it started, was essentially made to advertise products.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like you go into like the early 50s and it's like, TV was made to just advertise things. Like that's why you would like see breaks in between like television shows or like late night talk programs where they would literally advertise a vacuum or advertise, a microwave or, so.
Well, and there's something necessarily when it's, I mean, you can think about, of course, also advertisers are, when I'll just think about, because I was thinking about Roseanne, when she was got into all that hot water for that tweet, I'm sure one of the things is that if somebody on a TV show does something that the advertisers don't like, they can also cause problems with that. But I would say is that, like I mentioned, is that it used to be that the news didn't have to be the moneymaker or to carry its own water. So the advertisers, the money that they made from people advertising on TV shows and talk shows, would be used to subsidize the news. Whereas it's a bit different than people paying to advertise on the news. But yeah, it's not a surprise that that it shifted towards that direction. Of course, anything about capitalism is that anything that can be marketized, anything that can be commodified, is going to be commodified, and so it's not too surprising that the news, in a way, has been commodified. So it's something that's packaged and something that's manufactured with profit in mind. Is not, and that if news becomes it also become the same values that if a news program or a newspaper becomes unprofitable, it means it's a bad news program. Or bad, and it could be, but it depends. That depends. It's like, well, if the advertisers don't want to advertise on it, rather than if it's readership, because of course, if they're losing their readership or their watchers and their subscription model, then it's quite clear. But then, of course, you also could run the risk of being captured by your audience. Yeah. That if you get run, which is this, these are questions that don't, there's always going to be filters. You can never have, we can get a place where what we say, let alone what people report as the news, isn't going to be filtered somehow. I mean, we need filters, so you can't get out of filters, or else everything would be a mess, and we wouldn't be able to have any kind of reporting. But yeah. I just want to highlight that. I think it's important for everyone to remember, not just the news context, but anything that's free, then it means you're the product, your attention, or your time, your labor. Okay, so sourcing and staff. So the best information from the point of view of corporate news media is that which has an authoritative source that's already been compiled and shared freely. So you'll notice oftentimes in the news that they get information quite, the government will give them information, or so the government has a press office. Most government the White House has a press secretary, but most all government agencies are going to have a press office, or somebody, an agency that's responsible for sharing information, for interacting with the media. And so they get this information already. Here's the information on this policy, or here's our opinion, or our statement on such and such. And if it comes from an authoritative source that people would tend to find trustworthy, whether that be, to the extent that people still do, this is back in the 1980s, a government source or a church source, or, somebody, some well-known personality that people trust, then that's good. That's cheaper for the newspaper, the news, because then they can just rely on that person or that agency's reputation. Yeah. So, for example, so the best information. So again, the best information for sourcing information is which is already compiled and processed, and just is given to them by whoever their contact is, at a corporation or some other institution, etc. And if it's from an authoritative source, then it's less likely, because if they get information from somebody that no one's ever heard of before, then of course people be like, well, who's that person, or what's that organization? What do they have to say? But when it's like when it's like, well, the World Health Organization says this, or when it's the U.S. State Department says that Hamas is a terrorist organization, or or whatever, then it's kind of like, well, okay then. But anyway, but if it's just some random person who has no name or from an agency that has no name recognition, then it's like, well, so what? Then they would have to, by definition, if they want to, that reporter or that news program would have to spend the time and the resources to see if they have somebody else who can corroborate what that person or that unknown organization is saying. Anyway. And that depends on how much bandwidth they have to do it. Information from a source with no name recognition or who is not affiliated with a trusted institution then needs to be vetted and their claims corroborated. This takes time and other resources. Most large firms, international organizations, and governmental bureaucracies have press offices whose only job is to offer the information and comments that align with their interests and values to their news media contacts. This mobilizes bias in favor of institutions with press offices and cultural clout. How could it not? So when you see this, and you would notice, if you notice this, especially on, I noticed it in journalism as well as broadcast news. It's like U.S. It's like a U.S. government official or Pentagon official or World Health Organization official or UN official or so. Like so they have, so basically they're getting a lot. What does that mean? Is they're getting a lot of what they're giving to us is what is the quote unquote official information. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's going to be processed, curated, and not that it's not useful information, but just to go with the official information. It's like, okay, well, what's the unofficial, or what didn't they get included, or what
right. Yeah. That as you were talking, I was trying to look for an article, two articles on sort of Hegel's comments on liberal bureaucracy, but I can't.
Hegel.
Yeah, because Hegel really sort of theorized on the sort of like liberal bureaucracy, but I can't access the article because it's behind a paywall. But I do have this quote from Max Weber on
Weber.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. My bad. Okay, and I'm a sociologist. Okay, but okay, so he says this. He defines bureaucracy as a highly structured, formalized, and also an impersonal organization. He also instituted the belief that an organization must have a defined hierarchical structure and clear rules, regulations, and lines of authority which govern it. And I think that sort of fits the sort of nature of the sources and the employees, because what we're talking about is essentially a liberal bureaucracy that is then presented towards us as the audience, right? So when you mention like, oh, State Department official and all this, like we're getting this sort of liberal bureaucracy talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
so they can say they go around to all these resources, but it's kind of like, how diverse, like if we have let's say five hedge fund managers, and they're all from 5 different countries, and um, some women, we have a very diverse group. They're still all hedge fund managers, so they're still from a similar institution and line of work. So we're likely probably going to get the same kind of, it's going to produce the same type of bureaucratic speak. And so it's not, so if we bring this back to the Hamas question, do you condemn Hamas, and how that works there? It's not surprising that all these the official sources and the official and the representatives of the various institutions, kind of all fall on that line. And so we would call them, say, talking points. Yeah. So you have to condemn Hamas unequivocally. You have to accept the categorization as they're a terrorist organization, which means another invitation not to think anything past they're bad, and the only question is how to eliminate them, nothing else. As well as the similar things that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Israel has a right to defend itself, and that basically comes down to it. But so again, they could. I mean, there's no shortage of people who have who've been studying this issue and been following this issue, this conflict for, some people their whole lives, their whole professional lives. There's no shortage of information out there that could give people a better understanding of the different stakes involved, the different, not just the history and all that stuff, not necessarily, like pro or, one team and the other, but they don't want any of that. They just want this kind of processed State Department, Pentagon, kind of very polished PMC Zionist professionals to come out and tell us the same thing, which is basically that Hamas is very bad and Israel has to defend itself, and that's it.
Right, and I want to.
There's nothing more to think about here, and if you
right.
and in fact, if you do try to go on beyond much of that, then you get the smears start and the accusations.
Yeah,
and also make them very fancy, as to use your word, fancy, but kind of milk toast array of pundits.
Yeah, I also want to note to that point is that by the merger of like the neoliberal state and sort of corporations to underwrite and fund these journalism departments in universities like Northwestern University, NYU, USC School of Journalism, all those things, is that what they're doing is they're crafting a bureaucratic caste.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of individuals that come out of that caste are obviously we see them are the Piers Morgans. And if you live in the United States, to our audience out there, Stephen A. Smith, who's a sports journalist, but who coincidentally, which I find very interesting, is merging. He has a national podcast talk show where he's now not simply just speaking about sports, but he's also speaking on politics, and he's speaking on popular culture. And you see him integrating and migrating in these spaces with other members of his bureaucratic caste, like a Piers Morgan, like CNN anchors and things like that. So all these people, Anderson Cooper, all of these people, in sort of the context of now, seem to sort of be like they're starting to sort of like gravitate towards one another to sort of make sure that hammer comes down, and sort of no sort of dissent in terms of.
Well, they have a shared point. They have a shared worldview. If they didn't have one, they could come from different places when they enter into these institutions. If they're going to go to journalism school and get a master's in journalism or whatever, But by the time they go through those programs, they will be quite homogenous. And I think you're probably, being that you're doing Anthony's is working on his sociology degree, I'm sure you come across that fantastically alienating term, human capital. Yeah. So so the journalism school, or like any other discipline that's directly connected to a job afterwards. So you go to journalism school to be a journalist, or to work at, whether it be in print or broadcasting, or I guess it's also saying, yeah. When I say broadcasting, I also mean online or regular. You know what I mean? So that the type of places you want to get hired at. So what you also learn is what kind of person they're interested in hiring.
Yeah, yeah,
so you're going to.
That's true of the social sciences.
Yeah, so they're producing not necessarily how to be a hard-hitting, truth-seeking, bullshit detecting journalist, but how to be a successful professional reporter or broadcaster or whatever for the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or whatever, or to get a fancy podcast or something like that, And it's just that if you don't get that by alienating people. People don't want to hire. They want to hire someone who they think has charisma, who could do the job, whatever, but they don't want to hire anyone that's going to cause them problems. Are you a troublemaker?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
so it's kind of like, you get process, you learn the discourse, you learn how the people talk, and you can say that's not what people should go into school for, but people, it's like, the thing is that if people aren't employable when they get out of these programs, then they become very pissed about that. Yeah. So, you have to learn how to walk the walk. You learn how to become, you want to be, another sociologist, the habitus or whatever. You learn how to walk and talk like, a well-heeled graduate school type of journalist. And I think other people, Matt Tabey talked about this also, other people, that it used to be that you could, a lot of reporters didn't come out of graduate school. You could get a reporting job, you would start at the bottom, right out of high school, and then the people that had a knack for it would work their way up. But now it's that, it's become.
Ooh, it's that PMC shit.
Yeah, it's become professionalized. Well, and if you think about it, why do you need a graduate degree to be a journalist? I mean, I think it would help. I mean, I think if you want to be like a particular correspondent, so if you want to be a Middle East correspondent, then I could see that it would, but then not in journalism, but in that field. Mm-hmm. It makes sense to be like, to do like political science or geopolitics or, Middle Eastern studies or whatever, to get a kind of a, language to get that going, not how to report. I mean, the what, when, why, and how, and the kind of the art of it that you discover about people who, want to get after the truth, want to get the story, can cultivate sources and all this stuff. I can't imagine that that's anything that you learn in. Maybe you do, but
yeah, you're right, and that kind of
on the job, or someone taking you under your wing.
That kind of speaks to sort of like what I mentioned in our last two episodes ago about how culturally everything has become essentially PMC, right? Everything has become fancy and bougie. So even in that aspect of it,
and boring,
and boring. So if you were to tell, like, if I was to go right now to KTLA and say, hey, look, I want to be a reporter, I only have a high school degree. I don't have.
I start at the bottom and work my way up. Yeah.
Yeah, they would look at me and be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, they're like, no, you have to go to, go to USC, go to, Northwestern, I mean.
Yeah, this is a side issue, but there's a whole bunch of, it's kind of I don't know even what the word is, but the jobs that used to not require a college degree or an advanced or a graduate degree that now do, and no one seems to ask like, well, why? I mean, some things make sense. you know,
Yeah, like a doctor.
have a college degree or a graduate degree or further on. But for
Yeah,
some
like a
reason,
brain
it's like,
surgeon.
why do we have a graduate school of journalism? This seems silly.
Right. It's to create that bureaucratic caste. You know, that's what I find fascinating about. I remember once watching a mainstream news program, and they had on some like government insider people, and they were crapping on the RT reporters, and they literally said, okay, they literally said, we're going to ban RT, but we're going to make sure that all of those reporters that went to RT, that they no longer can find work, and we're going this. They literally said this. They said that we're going to go back to where those people went to school and make sure that we tell the journalism students that if they go to RT, they're not going to find a job in America. Literally, I saw this was on CNN.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
this was
think
also because of the whole Russiagate thing, when people were convinced that Trump was a Manchurian candidate, ran out of Moscow,
right.
rather than just a transactional opportunist.
Yeah, I think this is what's so fascinating about some of those RT reporters who have now become like essentially like big time independent media people, where it's like Abby Martin, Anya Parampil and her husband Max Blumenthal, and Matt Taibbi.
Was Max Blumenthal on RT, or was he just a guest? I can't remember.
He would frequently be on there. I mean, he was like practically working for them. You know what I mean? Because but
yeah, I don't know. I know that. Yeah, I don't.
But it's interesting to me. So it's like interesting to me, the sense of like those people. Like, even though I do have some criticisms against some of them, but like I do understand that they've risked their livelihoods to sort of go against the grain. Because now they're essentially all unemployed and freelance, so like Anya Pompil and her, like they're essentially unemployed, because they shut down.
No, they're self-employed.
Right.
They're based on, that's the thing, is that this switch to the subscription model,
Right.
So so you have regular subscribers, and you have like the super chats, and you're just kind of hustling, and all this stuff. And even still, they get him and Aaron Motte and some of their other people. I think they have 2 other people working for the Gray Zone now. They still get smeared all the time, and it's usually, I think, just because they actually, they actually are investigative journalists, will actually go and investigate things.
Right. Interesting.
And so it's and not just like, well, we asked this person from this government official said this, and then this government official said that, so clearly this must be the case. Like, well, no, that's what the official position is. Whether or not that corresponds with facts on the ground, or other people involved, actually involved and affected, might think, that's a different story. But they get their ducks in the row. But yeah. Okay, so ideology, that's the fourth. Where am I at? Let's see. Ideology, yes. Or bias, if you prefer.
I think ideology fits, especially because I think in the context of manufacturing consent, I think ideology fits the best, because when you look at a figure like David Frum, who, when I was a kid
people only fail up.
Yeah. So when you look at a figure like David Frum, who, when I was a kid, was an arch Republican and an arch right winger who was part of the George Bush administration, now he's transformed himself into a quote unquote a sober voice that is sort of like now shifted away from what's considered the American right, and now he's become a sober voice for like the sort of liberal bureaucratic establishment, So the ideology is like America. The ideology is something that is like there's like a third way of it. It's like it's American bureaucratic. I don't know what the Apologies if I'm rambling.
No, it's okay. Anyway, so I just think, just for people who might be more familiar with spin or bias, or point of view, etc. But ideology, So when the Manufacturing Consent was first published in 1988, anti-communism, thus pro-capitalism, was hegemonic in the West. So reporters and editors were hyper aware of the importance of not appearing soft on the Soviet Union if they wanted to retain access and remain employable. Today, one can be critical of certain groups of the bankers or sectors, so housing and gas, or trends, financialization, credit default swaps, all that, or types, such as shareholder value, but not of liberalism or capitalism as such. So liberal capitalism, which is the still what we would consider to be the hegemonic ideology, or the just what's taken as a given, but we give it a name, liberal capitalism, still retains the appearance of being the neutral position. So just taking, those deemed to be too soft on or duped by China or Russia, for example, or now I guess it would be Palestinians, will receive opposition, and those open about their socialist or communist politics are very unlikely to be hired by platforms and outlets dependent on advertising revenue and access to elite sources. So this is going on, is that we can and typically and nominally, of course, you have freedom of the press still, even though, well, maybe to a certain extent, because you have Julian Assange in jail and you have people wanting to criminalize or of course, freedom of speech is always going to be under some sort of attack. It's going to wax and wane. But since in the United States, and also in the West more broadly, since Trump and Brexit, that was the first wave of things, people wanting to clamp down, especially on non-mainstream sources or non-corporate sources, because, oh my God, look, the people voted wrong. The people voted for Trump, and the people voted for Brexit, which for the professional managerial class was voting wrong. And so, oh my God, and since it couldn't be that there was anything, any good reason or valid reason why someone wouldn't vote for Clinton or vote against Brexit, so it must be misinformation and disinformation. Oh my God, we have to clamp down on this. And then, of course, the Russiagate that turned out to be basically all conspiracy about Donald Trump can say a lot about Donald Trump, a lot of bad things about Donald Trump, but the idea that he was a spy out of Moscow was turned out not to be the case. But then that was another thing, and then the COVID thing, and now with Israel is the thing that a news program or a reporter, a newspaper, a network can be pro-Israel, emphatically pro-Israel, and that's kind of the norm. What's being anyway critical of it is what's considered odd. Yeah. And again, this comes into the what about Hamas question, that if it's the norm or the standard, or the expected position, that of course we're, from go, we identify and are pro Israeli stance. And how do you show that? You show that by accepting whatever they say, taking it at face value, and I guess letting them write the talking points. But that's taken as the norm. That's not seen. It becomes actually a neutral position. Of course, it's not a neutral position, but it becomes over time a neutral position. What stands out are people who, if not, you don't have to be go the opposite direction. But if someone just wanted to be objective to the extent, let's look at both sides, even people who just wanted to both sides this, which those of us who've been looking at it for a long time find highly problematic. But even that, or just basic journalism, okay, we have this claim, it sounds outlandish. Before we release it and say that there was 40 beheaded babies or mass rape or whatever, maybe we should see if there's any actual testimony or actual evidence or reason to share this, knowing how explosive it is, just totally repeating it. Mm-hmm. And that's not considered problematic. What's considered problematic and rude are the people who be like, is there any evidence to this? Because this seems a bit, sounds like propaganda to me. Oh, just the question becomes, you become tainted as again, not a terrorist sympathizer or anti-Semite, just by knowing the fact that we should be skeptical of governments always and corporate interests, but in particular when bombs are being dropped and we're being asked not to care about civilian casualties, then we should be particularly interested in how we're being encouraged to go along with that or to not look closely. But that's considered not the neutral position or even an acceptable one, but somehow radical to think that Israel and the Israeli government and that the U.S. Military apparatus or in the White House should actually be questioned or asked to not be contradictory, asked how it is they came by this, why are they saying what they're saying. This is all no, we're just supposed to believe and go along, and that's it.
Right. That really started to kind of really morph itself in the Bush administration during the 2000s, right? Even though there was still, like, if you go back and watch, there was still, like, reporters would still ask President Bush, like, hardball questions. But by the time President Obama became president, and probably by, like, the early to mid 2010s, like 2012 to 2014, it seems like the press had become so homogenized that it was just like, okay, we'll just go with it. We'll just go with
I think it was before. I think it was the war on. I would say that with the quote unquote war on terror after 9/11, that this whole thing about weapons of mass destruction, and even though there was lots of, even when the anti-war movements kicked off before they went into Iraq, they could give a shit. Everybody was in lockstep. In the U.S. and most of the West with them, I think, at least the political class was, and the media was like, right, left, or didn't, not right and left, but Republican and Democrat, all of that. There was no pushback, even when people, like when the weapons inspectors didn't agree that there was weapons of mass destruction, and the U.S. just basically said, yeah, we have different intelligence.
You're right. You're right.
No, I mean, there was no, and this is another thing, is that, and how we don't learn, the idea that if you have a lot of people who if you have an institution that's supposed to be adversarial vis-a-vis concentrations of power, particularly the state, but also, of course, corporations and other elite entities, if they're supposed to be adversarial with them, and they become unable to do that because they all go to the same school or they all hang out together, so they identify with each other. So it becomes weird or rude or problematic to ask too difficult of a question. There's a reason why. I think there's a reason why some reporters have a reputation for being assholes. Is you kind of have to be an asshole if you're going to be a good reporter. I mean, I'm not kind of like waitresses and busboys and people, regular people, but the two people that you're trying to, hold to account. If you want to be their friend and be liked and be asked to the parties and maybe, who knows what, then there. So I think all of this has gone. There's a lot of things that have gone on in the last that Chomsky and Herman were picking up on that just gotten more pronounced and more obvious in the 30 plus years since, is that the press has been defanged to a certain extent. It's been controlled. It's been sorted out through carrots and sticks and professionalization, I think.
Right.
And of course, consolidation and mergers and scale and all this stuff. And our seemingly insatiable need to be entertained and stimulated. Even the news has to be exciting, people. I need somebody to be fighting about something, or else I'm not watching. So yeah. I need Piers Morgan to get increasingly pissed every time, every one of the 38 times he asks Jeremy Corbyn to unequivocally condemn. That's what I need to be watching. Not Norm Finkelstein talking in his dulcet tones for 40 minutes about the ins and outs of the Gaza case, Although I can because I dig norm. But it's a different skill set. I don't even know. Maybe that's being trained out of us, or not necessarily.
Well, yeah, it definitely did.
We don't have that. Like we want to get the quick, like just give me the 2 bullet points, give me the thing, and then I'll just go out about my business and just trust that somebody else is thinking about it when it seems that maybe nobody really is. I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely the vibe for sure. And one of the funny things I find about Pierce, if I'm not mistaken, what I feel like I knew him from, wasn't he a talent show host?
Yeah, some America's Got Talent or UK's Got or something like that. Yeah,
yeah. So I'm like, how did this guy who was
UK version? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. So it's like, how did this? I remember he may have moonlighted on American Idol when I was a kid, taking over for Simon or something. But
maybe
it's like, how did this guy who was a talent show host, who was working with Simon Cowell, how the hell did he get to this position of being like now he's all over the Anglosphere. He's in Australia. He's in America. He's in the UK. He's in Canada. Like, how the hell did that happen?
Well, there is that one picture of him and Ghislaine Maxwell. So no. And I'm sorry. You're not supposed to respond like that, because if you notice, this is also a cultural. I don't know what you'd call it, a cultural meme now or a trope. And then when somebody's irritated about someone's calling out something did, and people will just, if there's any photo of them with Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell, they just post that with no comment, because that just tells us everything we need to know.
You're right.
Like, well, that clears it up then.
You're right.
Look at this picture with them, and it's like, well, okay, so so I'm just to think that, okay, so I'm assuming it means that he's like there's a blackmail file on this person. That's what they're saying. But maybe that's what and it's like, and you have to think, like, in this day and age when you can really recover from a lot of things, especially if you can blame it on an addiction. I'm like, what, to the extent that they have blackmail files on people, I guess, yeah, underage, yeah. So if it's
yikes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, but I think that's funny. It's like, okay, they think that's the end of a conversation rather than like a beginning of one. It's like you just somebody be like, see, case closed. Right. It's like now the thing that I'll bring this up because I brought this up with Noam Chomsky, because he's taken some hits the last couple of years because for whatever reason, maybe he was scared in his old age. I don't know, because he wasn't very critical at all with the COVID policies, even including lockdown, including like how people who didn't want to get vaccinated, how they were treated. He seemed to be all on board with that. And now that there's now that it's also known that he met a couple of times with Epstein. Probably, my guess would be that it's because he's a known entity, and of course he is Jewish, but also he's Noam Chomsky, and he's been at MIT, and I'm sure that Epstein and whoever he was working for were keen on. I'm sure they were benefactors of some sort to MIT. So who knows? It could have just been a social situation. But
I think it's probably more like that.
His comment was no comment. Like, I'm not gonna,
right.
Which is a smart thing to do. Like, I'm not gonna. There's something to talk about. I'm not gonna talk about. But of course, then people just run wild. But now people are like, oh, he was a psyop. He was from the beginning. He was,
Well, those people have never worked in academia, so they don't know about the kind of people you're going to meet to get grant money and research money, and you have to hobnob. You know what I mean? Yeah. You have to schmooze. You have to. That's just part of working in research and things like that. So it's like, I don't think him.
So yeah, but it's also that, I mean, there's people can, of course, are free to have. I'm not saying he's blameless or there's nothing to critique. I mean, in terms of his politics and his effect on the left, but the left is so weak. People want to blame particular people, and one of the people that people like to blame these days is Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, unfortunately,
he was just a psyop, and he was about disempowering the left and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know. But that's not how I, to me, it's just like his whole thing, and maybe his shortcoming, or who knows, ours is that he really believed that there was a lack of information problem, and it comes out in this book as well. But not as, because obviously he's a linguistic, but most of his book, he's much more known for his political books, and so his books are, his things is trying to get the information out. The idea that people knew more about what actually was going on in Vietnam, for example, or was actually going on in the war on terror, then the politics could change. So basically, having a lot of faith that people knew more, just the facts, the empirical record. They just need to know the empirical record, that people would do differently. And now I don't know, because even though our consent's manufactured still significantly, there's no shortage of information. And if I wanted to, or if somebody was, or if it just kind of, who knows why people, sometimes some of the topics we become quite fluent in or expert in just kind of happened by happenstance. Like it wasn't, someone had told me when I was graduating, when I was getting out of college at 20, that I would be, in a few years, I'd be in Gaza for 2 years. I would have been like, you're out of your mind. It just kind of happened. So there's a reason why I know a lot about this issue, and people fall on it differently. But, it's just that, I guess what I want to say, because I'm droning on here, sorry about that, is that it's not just information. We know quite a bit. I mean, I'm sure that the consensus now, that if you look at, we can know all the ins and outs of the Vietnam War, why we got involved, what happened there, all the crimes and all the stuff that were going on into it. But yet, does that become part of the kind of like the general consciousness? Does it have any way of making it less likely that we get into these foreign wars? Not yet. So
yeah, you're right.
And why that is the whole thing. So just the thing that that it's not just, obviously information is important. I mean, being aware of how it's filtered and how it's massaged, and how oftentimes people will take one part of a story and make that the whole story rather than just one part of it.
Right.
To be aware of that, but in and of itself, it's just one part of a larger issue.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the reason why he so steadfastly holds on to that ideal. I think that speaks to his own personal experience growing up in the 30s, I believe. He was in a very sort of radical cultural milieu in New York City, where normal average folks had access to radical labor newspapers and stuff like that. So I think that left a large impression on him, that normal people, because he's from the working class, that normal people can have access to this information. And then I think that is his overarching thing. But then also I think, him also being an anarchist and not being a Marxist, he doesn't understand the nature of idealism in that way, where if you're a Marxist, you understand that just having disorganized, putting out pamphlets or putting out information like that, it's not going to, right? It's not going to have that.
Yeah, then what?
Yeah. Then,
I think that he would be aware that you have the political mobilization is still a factor. But yeah. Okay, so we want to wrap up here. So have the final filter. So we have the scale and profit motivation that filters the news. The revenue model, so being dependent on advertisers and need to make a profit, of course, shapes the news, because they're interested in advertising on programs that are going to be appealing to the segment of the market they want to sell their products to. Ideology, of course. And with that one is to think about what is there is no such thing, I would say, as a non-ideological, completely objective position. We're all of and in this world, in this language, but to be aware, just to be aware of what's which point of view and perspective, or whatever you want to call it, is being positioned as the norm or the universal in any particular situation, to get at least have an idea of what's being shadowed out or shaded out or presented as somehow fringe or not suitable for news. Anyway, flack. It's a great old word. So when a culture of access develops where reporters, podcasters, media personalities, or academics, etc., rely on their connection to elite institutions, data, personnel, or funds, then those who do not engage in this culture, especially those who openly critique it, will face opposition. Flack is an informal disciplinary practice that encourages a go-along to get along culture or ethos. So people don't have to engage in the condemnation game, but you ought not to try to disabuse others from doing so, or calling out how problematic it is. And so, of course, this is one of the reasons I think about one of the reasons why maybe people like Glenn Greenwald get so much flack, and is because if he doesn't play the media game that most people in the media play. So he's kind of, he's talking about, he's bringing up too many elephants in the middle of the room that people rather not talk about, So because it makes them maybe feel self-conscious or defensive, that somehow like they have to, it makes it more difficult to continue to pretend that working in a for-profit media space doesn't affect the media at all, the journalism at all. And there's nothing wrong with hobnobbing with the people that we're supposed to be reporting on. So flack is, and of course, professionals, we want to think of ourselves as, professionals in the media space want to think of themselves as autonomous and propelled by logic and truth and science. And when this belief is challenged, then directing flack towards those bringing up these inconvenient or comfortable questions or findings can also bolster consent for the current practice or coverage when it binds those engaged in, for example, the condemnation game together. So it's kind of like if there's only a few people calling it out, but everybody else is doing it. So it's just kind of like high school. So, and then what can bind people together? So the people the people in the space who don't accept or who don't see any problem with, or don't even acknowledge that that they're not approaching the Israeli-Palestine conflict, for example, from any kind of objective or balanced position, but from an overtly pro-Israel, uncritical of Israel, and then of course also U.S. policy position. They'll instead of accepting that, they're going to lash out at you, and the people that do that binds them together, which I think that's kind of, you can all see how that kind of works. So flack disciplines would-be dissenters, and further binds together adherents of whatever practice that's going on there. Anyway, so and we can see that. So it's not that the people, maybe now it'll be a bit different. You can get it depending on these hate speech laws that go around, but you can imagine that that it's still not difficult. So no one wants to be, in principle, no one wants to be considered or called out being soft on terrorism or a terrorist sympathizer. And so to the extent that groups are characterized in that way, I'm sure it's not difficult to understand why people don't fight back against that in the newsrooms and in the broadcasting studios and all that, and all those institutions. Because it just seems like it just is it's as normal as the coffee break, I'd imagine, in those spaces. Anyway, Herman and Chomsky's analysis of the mass media demonstrated how victims of state violence were sorted into worthy and unworthy categories. So the unworthy victims are those not deserving of any sustained attention or empathy. They found, unsurprisingly, that victims generated by the U.S. or its allies were unworthy of news coverage from their own perspective. Two contemporary examples would be the quality and quantity of media coverage of Israeli victims compared to Palestinian victims, and that of the war in Ukraine compared to the war on Yemen when it was going on. And we can see this quite clearly that in most, whether it be the BBC or MSNBC or CNN or the New York Post, New York Times, Times of whatever, is that there's a tremendous amount of concern for feelings of lately this last week, so of Jewish students in college campuses, right?
Yeah.
And there's so those people, and then also, of course, the families of the hostages that are still being held in Gaza. And even though you have maybe upwards of 20,000, probably more people murdered by Israelis bombardment, most of which are women and children and elderly, it's quite clear, it becomes quite pronounced who we're supposed to empathize with and who we're supposed to blame for their own predicament or not, or to rationalize in some way. I mean, the worthy, unworthy victim sorting could not be clearer than it is in this situation. And to the extent that this is what reaches people who may not be particularly political or know the ins and outs of this issue, but we're all human, and if you see, babies and children and people being blown out, so they have to be able to combat that. One way is just in quantity. They're not going to show that much of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they're not going to show. They're going to keep it limited as possible. The Palestinians that have been killed by all the bombs being dropped indiscriminately by Israel. And they won't even say that. They'll just, they're still trying to hold on to the line that they go out of their way not to kill civilians. That seems to be all they do. So something isn't squaring up here. Or just so they don't have them on very much, or they make it quite clear that they're somehow responsible for it because in 2006, their parents or whoever was alive in 2006 in Gaza voted wrong in a free and fair election. So somehow they deserve it. I don't know. It's basically, it comes down to that. So thanks to these filters, in terms of these 5 filters, and this is the argument that they make again, is why you don't need to have an authoritarian censorship regime in law to be able to manufacture quite handily how this, in terms of their book, foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, is reported on in the news. That through these filters that largely kind of work seamlessly behind the scenes, that the state doesn't have to strong arm or tell or send a direct memo to BBC or MSNBC or the New York Times which groups or places are worthy of coverage or worthy of empathy. It just happens. Well, it doesn't just happen, but it happens. You don't have to have coercive totalitarian means. And of course, if you ever watched The Century of the Self, have you seen that documentary?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this, of course, before. So when they used to call it, before it was called public relations, it was called propaganda. So I think it was Edward Bernays, which was the nephew, I think, of Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
He worked for governments and worked for governments and corporations, and basically the same thing is that you don't need authoritarian policies to affect what people think and what they do, or what they want. I mean, not completely, of course, but to a considerable degree. And they're right. And we can know it. It's how effective it is. We can know about these things, and it still affects us.
True, you're right.
I mean, it's,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fairly skeptical person, and there was a time when I was starting to think, I wonder if Trump is a Kremlin spy. And I was never a fan of his, of course. I wasn't a fan of Hillary Clinton. This is before I knew Bernie was such a disappointment. But so yeah, I kind of get into that. I was, surprised by the election, because I thought even though Clinton was unpopular, I figured that enough people would just assume that even though they didn't like her at all or even hated her, that they weren't going to put somebody in there that seemed to like have no idea what That's right. But then again, that was a product of the news that I was getting. And so, but then even though I knew, I was like, okay, this just seems like sour grapes and they don't want to accept it and they're freaking out, just like as people are freaking out at Brexit as well. But at a certain point, even though you know how the sausage is made, you can become totally affected by it. It's just becomes in the milieu somehow. And you have to act like, wait a minute, no, come on now. This probably is let's be skeptical. This is unlikely.
Yeah.
That they would be either that coordinated. It's like they have to be both smarter than they are and stupider than they are at the same time for that to be. Yeah, so there's things we can say about this. It's getting a bit late, but when I was working with this framework and applying it to universities, so how consent is manufactured in universities through these filters as well. I thought another way that it's not just certainty that through which an unearned certainty that consent is manufactured. So we're encouraged to see something in a particular way, and like it gets hammered over and over again, the same kind of sound bites and talking heads or whatever. But also through ambiguity, keeping things uncertain, or keeping questions that could be answered unanswered, because it's politically easier to do so, or keep saying things are complicated but no longer really complicated. So for example, this ambiguity, and I don't know if it's playing dumb, I don't know what this is, but even now when it's like people still not able to accept or still phrasing it as a question, is Israel is Israel's bombing campaign indiscriminate? Fuck yeah, it's clearly indiscriminate. They say as much. They say as much. They do as much. Everything. It's like, but they have these questions that have to be kept open, that don't have to be kept open anymore. I mean, I think so. Through ambiguity is also the same. Or like, did COVID come from a lab or did it come from a wet market? It came from a fucking lab. We know what lab it came from, but they have to leave the question open. Were these vaccines actually vaccines or therapeutics? They were fucking therapeutics. We had to keep that, but it has to be this question mark, yeah. And I think this is, I don't know if it's just the long game or just drawing it out or just hoping that people just get tired and won't push enough because people don't want to have to stress having to sort out all this crap. They want to move on. But I think that, and I don't think that he would disagree with that, but just in this topic, that keeping things open that aren't open, or keeping a question mark when we no longer need the question mark, is another way that consent is just kind of manufactured for, like, oh, we just don't know, so I guess we have to go, because if the established narrative or position or policy on something is going to be overturned, then you usually need a preponderance of evidence. So it takes more to undo something than it does to keep it going. So I think that's where also this ambiguity comes in. There's enough doubt. Well, and it's just it comes out all. You see it all the time, and I can see like it's an academic question mark. So you want to invite people in. So like you want to invite them to ask the question themselves, and you go through the question together in the different ways of looking at it. That's fine. But when it comes to the point where there's something obvious, and it's and it's during what's going on now with this openly genocidal campaign, and there's people still wanting to talk about does Israel target hospitals? Do they? It's like, yes, and they say as much. Why can't you say what they say and do?
Right.
But it's not a hypothetical. It's not a question anymore. And this is where this weird, I don't even know what you call this. If it's just to be polite, it'd be like
that's what it is.
It's like if you don't want to admit if you don't want to admit to yourself or to somebody else that they're an alcoholic or something. It's like, well, they were only drunk like 5 out of 16. Or, I'm only drinking 3 bottles of wine a night, not 4. So, I mean, I don't know. It's like, yes, fuck, there's an issue.
Yeah, you're right. Hey, I hate to interrupt, but my laptop is on 3%. I don't know. I don't want to die on you.
Nope. Yeah, it's okay. It's we'll use it as a chance to wrap up. But anyway, thank you. It's been great, Tony. So those are our 5 filters, and including ambiguity. So it goes both ways. So being overly confident that we know that when we're not, so presenting something as fact that's not, or presenting something as open question that's no longer an open question, way beyond the time. That to me is almost more frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you.
Oh no, I totally agree. I have things to say, but my laptop's about to die.
Well, if you want to bump that, I can take a music break. If you want to, if you have something you want to say, you can come back on with your phone or plug in your laptop.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, let me just go in my room because the laptop charger is already plugged into the outlet.
Tony's on the move, people.
Yes.
Let's see if I have anything interesting here. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did have some extra stuff. So,
I don't know if you can even see me. It's so bright. But, okay.
No, that's all right. I'll just go on to manufacturing consent in terms of how something's reported. So, in terms of what happened on October 7th is just an example. They were like, oh, terrorist attack, Hamas terrorist attack. And also, not just a terrorist attack, we're either like it's a terrorist attack or which is also a pogrom. So it's just about going on a murderous rampage. That was all it is. Whereas people that have actually looked at what happened that day are saying, no, this was, Scott Ritter, for example, says this is a military raid. It was a well-planned, executed military raid with strategic day of goals and fit into the politics, whether you agree with them or not, of Hamas and the broader Palestinian resistance. It has maybe like 11 groups. Hamas is the largest one. It's the only one that was tried to make the transition to governing and ran for office in 2006. And he also says it's the most successful military raid this century, which of course is foreboding because we're only supposed to say that it is a terrorist attack and it was an anti-Semitic terrorist attack, and that was the only reason for it. So again, just this one thing, and you can imagine that if you're characterizing something from go as a terrorist attack and nothing else, then it stops thought and it stops looking into it because, well, then that's bad, and the only thing to do is to condemn it and to sympathize wholly with one side. Whereas they could say, and this would also be an honest statement, that on October 7th, Hamas carried out a raid on Israeli-occupied Palestinian territory.
Yeah.
And if you go from the UN map, the original partition mandate, that is a true statement. And if you just go by some of the legal settlements, also a true statement. But of course, problematic because that doesn't fit the established narrative, which is that that we're supposed to always encourage to think of Israel as the good and the victimized and the beacon of democracy or whatever, and never to consider the fact that this group, these people that have been put upon and occupied and everything else since 1967. I mean, the refugees, the ethnic cleansing started in earnest in 1948, but the occupation, the military, when we say Israeli occupation, that started in 67 after the 6-day war. But anyway, so that would be, and so again, if you call something a military raid, you're going to, it doesn't mean that means that everything that they did is great because it's a military raid. I mean, if they were wantonly murdering civilians, that is technically a war crime, of course. If there was anything, if anybody raped anybody, of course, you can't, that's, but the idea that Hamas planned and orchestrated a successful military raid into Israeli occupied Palestinian territories, that is not an untrue statement. Now, you could add in there that you could say, you could say it was, if your definition of terrorism is that it's an act of violence for political means, okay, but then everything that any military has ever done is terrorism. So it becomes a problem. But again, we know that's not how they use the word. We know what we're supposed to do. We know what the word terror and terrorist is supposed to, what it's supposed to solicit from us, and how it's to guard the people who that term is connected to, which is why we should be, if anything, more careful about the use of it. And I think politically it's totally unuseful.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that.
I don't think it's at all, I mean, anyway. Okay, so that's just an example of how with a small word or phrase. So if we were saying, October 7th Hamas assault on Israel, or a military raid or incursion, is different than if it's just they just will kill, and they'll kill the Jews whenever they get a chance. That's a very different framing. And one, it's going to encourage people to care quite less and be on board, like, yeah, Israel, good. That's why you see these things like, get them, kill them all, get them. This can't, all this stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, if people actually believe the story, then those reactions make sense. Some of them know, like Netanyahu knows what actually happened, but of course he's cynical, and also he's brought up part and parcel of a culture that considers Palestinians to be subhuman, cockroaches that should be exterminated. So, there's that too. Yeah, so this is again the worthy unworthy victim. You have Jake Tapper talking to another Jewish student who doesn't feel safe, and when you get down to that, and now what's happened and they don't feel safe because they see like Palestinian flag or someone's chanting from the river to the sea, and so they want to equate that with, they're going to kill all the Jews or something like that. This hysteria that's going on, and again, in terms of just in terms of how the news sucks, or it's not even the news anymore. Michael Tracy, I think it was, he was one of the people I follow on Twitter, has been following this spate of anti-Semitic resolutions or Congress resolutions against anti-Semitism. He's like, if people actually look at what it's like, because it's like nothing. It's basically all the stuff is being based on like an ADL report, the Anti-Defamation League, who basically considers anything that's critical of Israel to be anti-Semitic. And then you have these senators that say, well, ask these people, bring on these presidents of universities and say, if someone called for the genocide, if someone said Jews should be genocided, would that be against your school's policy? And these people, him and ha, rather than saying, can you give me a specific example of when somebody said that? Because what people have found, and of course, people, the quote unquote mainstream media, establishment media, they're just reporting or repeating that there's because the ADL again is an authoritative source, so no need to question the information coming from the Anti-Defamation League. So they don't look into it. They just present it as fact, and then the few people that look into it who are freelancers or whatever are saying, well, they consider anything that's critical of Israel's policy to be anti-Semitic. So maybe most people would not agree with that definition of anti-Semitism. And they're saying they want us to believe that people are going around on campuses calling for Jews to be gassed. But yet there's not one, there's hearsay, there's some, they found some, there's some Israelis, there's some Jewish students or Israeli students who said that they've heard this, but there's no evidence of it. And most people are like, and yeah, if someone was actually saying that, that would like, I'm like, really? There's people in Yale shouting at Jewish students that they should be Well, I mean, I'm going to need something. In
Yeah.
2023, I'm going to need something because there's people, powerful people, who are basically trying. Anybody that signs that has even like anywhere near a ceasefire rally, let alone a pro-Palestinian rally, they're trying to get them like unhired and ruin their lives. Don't hire these people.
Yeah, you're right. I actually felt that way a few days ago while watching the local news where this not elderly but old Jewish couple said that they were attacked in Beverly Hills, and the woman was all like, some guy came up to her and said, "Jew, hand me those earrings." Like you can go on there. I'll send you the link to the
No. I mean, but who knows? But yeah, it just seems some
No,
things
but it
just seem
seems
really
fake.
it's like, who talks that way? I mean, maybe it's possible, but
Yeah,
it's
I
just
mean,
like,
and then like in Beverly Hills of all places, where that place is like so stacked with cops and so stacked with police, like, and you're walking on the street in Beverly Hills and this happens, like, huh? Like,
well, also the typical boy who cried wolf, and this happens
yeah,
when you overuse and misuse a term that should be reserved for particular instances. So now it's just like, so if because we know, those of us who are paying attention, even halfway, that we like, if you have any kind of idea, so we have basically, people would know what pretty have a good idea what anti-Semitism is, and they can see like what they're saying. They're just saying that anything, that being critical of Israel or being critical of any Jewish person ever for any reason is by definition anti-Semitic.
mm,
It's like, well, when did that happen? you know,
yeah,
it's like, so you can't disagree. and and it's also the double standards, yeah. So you can't say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, because people will say, well, and this is what's also batshit crazy, that this means that you are saying that the Jews should be killed. It's like, well, why does one group of people being free mean another group of people have to be executed? Is odd. But the double standards is just amazing to me. So here's Eilat Shaked, who's the Israeli justice minister. And they were getting flack, of course, because of all the babies and kids that are being bombed and besieged. And this is what this lady said. Behind every terrorist stands dozens of men and women, without whom he could not engage in terrorism. They are all enemy combatants, and their blood shall be on all their heads. Now, this also includes the mothers of the martyrs, who send them to hell with flowers and kisses. They should follow their sons. Nothing would be more just. They should go, as should the physical homes in which they raised the snakes. Otherwise, more little snakes will be raised there. So here's the thing: is that Israelis and their supporter and their support, and so Israelis who say stuff like this and their supporters, that's fine. That's not that genocidal, dehumanizing talk from people who are actually carrying out, in their own words and deeds, carpet bombing and starving, besieging campaign of Gaza, and who are looking forward to the diseases starting to spread, because of course that will kill even more people, and not with bombs, which is better for them, PR wise. But people who say from the river to the sea, that's anti-Semitic hate speech, and they should be, punished for that. Or they found some guy, I don't know, he is a Hamas, he is a member of Hamas. In 2019, he went on a rant and was talking about everyone around the world should take up arms against the Jews and this and that. And now, was that a stupid thing for him to say? Yeah. Does he have the capacity to do it? No. Did anyone do anything based on that? Not that we know, but people want to show what that guy's doing and say, well, see, he said this in 2019, so all this is fine. I'm like, how does that even work? So she's just like, so you're saying this guy is a terrible terrorist, but yet she's doing what he only said he wanted to do, but somehow it's okay. I mean, it's just bizarre. People are more concerned about implied intention, what people may really mean by these statements they say are just anti-apartheid or for freedom. When you have people actually saying literally, not, there's no, these types of statements and carrying out the bombing and besieging campaign that we see. But this doesn't get any kind of pushback on the news. This is fine because they were traumatized and they're fighting for their lives. So of course it's okay for them to say and do this. Whereas the Palestinians that have been, dealing with ethnic cleansing and occupation and being abused and killed and defamed and detained for generations, they don't have, anything, if they even say half a crossword about a Jew, somehow they're beyond the pale. It's very odd.
Yeah.
No longer can not fight back. They can't say an ill word about their occupiers or their colonial masters. Then that just shows, look how crazy they are. Look what they said.
Right.
Boom.
Yeah.
But this lovely lady is, she's lovely. Oh yeah, and then of course normalizing and excusing war crimes. So the BBC Question Time. Now you're not supposed to shoot a hospital. That's a war crime. Yeah, you're not supposed to target civilian infrastructure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But BBC asks, is Israeli targeting of a hospital justified? Which implies it's an open question if you can bomb hospitals or not.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So we're going back.
We're
going back here, and then you have this cartoon from the Washington Post that says, "How dare Israel attack civilians?" And they have this picture of these kids strapped to this Hamas guy.
That's bizarre.
And nobody says anything about this.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. This is fine, but somebody wearing a Khalifa scarf is an anti-Semite who wants to kill all the Jews. Someone who says, I don't think they should be bombing, all the civilians and civilian infrastructure to make life totally uninhabitable. Jew hater. Terrorist sympathizer. Yeah,
this is just bizarre.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is.
When not just the words, but the conduct is clearly on a particular side here, and the means, means, motive, all that. This is fine.
Yeah.
This is Western values and respect for life and human rights and anti-discrimination. This guy here, and it's just crazy. And it's just so ridiculous because, and not that people care if they're going to believe this, but there have actually been Amnesty International and other places looked into this human shields question. And they found no evidence of Hamas trying to control where people go based on their security needs. However, they did find it with Israel. And Israel just now, because they're having a hard time, they're taking too many casualties in the ground invasion. They're showing their tanks. They're capturing some Palestinians and making them walk around their tanks as they go into Gaza. They're using They're using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Not the first time.
Yeah,
so it's literally almost like this. What's this guy's name? Would be Young or whoever. It's like almost to the letter. Every accusation is a confession lately with these people. And it's just like,
Yeah, and I don't see any stopping this. It's just.
Yeah, here's a guy. Civilians. So again, this worthy and unworthy, guilty or not guilty civilians. This is the guy from, I think he's an Israeli government dude. All the preoccupations with whether or not there's internet in Gaza shows that we have learned nothing. We are too humane. Burn Gaza now, no less.
Jesus.
And this is tame.
It's crazy talk.
Anyway, Yeah, so it's just that all of this, again, we talked about this yesterday before we got into the filters, is that this invitation or this normalization, this idea that it's normal to make this issue all about Hamas and how bad Hamas is, and not go back beyond October 7th and offer a very distorted propagandist explanation or picture of what happened on that day.
Mm-hmm.
So that not that it was so what it seems to be in fact would be a factual thing is that it was a military raid, and within this military raid were civilians killed? Yes, they were. Were hostages taken? Yes, they were. But this is nothing new, particular to Hamas. This is typical to the things that happen. This is typical violations that happen in wartime, which doesn't mean such as it is. But what gets avoided is, what you don't hear anything about is Zionism and how Jewish sovereignty in the form of a nation state, and that it's separatist because they want a Jewish state, so it's an ethno state. And if you set up an ethno state, a Jewish ethno state on land that has a majority, at the time that they declared the state of Israel, Israeli the Jews that were to become Israelis were 30% of the population. And if you go back 20 years before that, maybe much smaller. So you don't have to talk about occupation or settler colonial project. And when it's the Palestinians, if it's just Hamas, and what's Hamas, the terrorist group? If it's a terrorist group, then the only question is how to destroy them, nothing else. Then what totally falls away is the resistance against Zionism in their homeland, the Zionist project in their homeland, and their project for liberation and sovereignty. Yeah, there's a reason why they're not just resisting to take some Israelis out with them. They have a political program. You don't have to agree with it, but there is a program there, and none of this gets discussed at all. It's just about, okay, Hamas bad, how bad, really bad. Okay, what are the bounds? What will we allow Israel to do to eradicate this singular evil from our earth? And also, by the way, they're ISIS, and we're fighting them. So you don't have to fight for them. Send us money, send us guns, please, please, please. Don't worry about them. These are, ticking time bomb snake babies, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And now to your other scheduled program.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll see, and it keeps on going. Yeah, we still have questions. They're still asking questions that are no longer questions. In terms of, Israel said that they weren't going to let that they stopped letting water, food, and fuel and medicine into Gaza, and then they stopped letting fuel, food, and water and medicine into Gaza, and we see them bombing everything. But are they trying to? And then here's the new one. Here's the new spin. There's a difference between targeting civilians and indiscriminate bombing.
I don't even know what to say at this point.
Heard that one the other night. Douglas Murray, I think. So it's not fair. Or it was Dershowitz. It was something. Again, being legalistic. There's a difference between deliberately trying to kill civilians and indiscriminate bombing. What? Yeah. So it's like it wasn't personal. I mean, like we weren't trying to get you in particular. We were just trying. We just decided to take out this area. Ooh. Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. Remember October 7th? Ah! Yeah, I mean, here we are, and we have, that to be critical of the Zionist project is the U.S. Congress all says, okay, that's anti-Semitic and anti, all the money people are coming to the colleges, the fancy universities, and saying, we're not going to donate any more money to you if you don't crack down on these student protests. It's exactly what they're saying.
Yeah, they are.
Mm-hmm. And they're getting away with it. We'll see what the students do. We'll see what the students do, because it's also, they're probably like, let me get this straight. You pump us full of decolonization and social justice concerns, and now you're saying we can't. Well, we have a problem, because here's the thing: is that I think with Israel, the Israeli lobby, or Israelis and their supporters want to have it both ways. So they want to be like, no, you should be on our side because we're oppressed. We're the Jews, and no one's been more oppressed than the Jews. Remember the Holocaust, etc., etc. And these people are going, well, yeah, that's true, but in this instance, you're the colonizing occupier, so
right.
No victim for you. And they're just like,
yeah.
And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can show Jewish person after Jewish person who's critical of Israel. Not necessarily. It doesn't mean they're totally anti-Zionist, but they're critical of Israel from just in terms of how they just in terms of the Palestinian policy, all the way up to the guy I was telling you about yesterday, who were like, they don't recognize Israel as the Jewish state. They think that's heretical. To whatever reason, it's like that. Those people are also totally marginalized. If they give the impression that no, every Jewish person feels this way. That when you critique Israel, you make a Jewish person cry, and that makes you bad, and you shouldn't do it. But don't care about all these people being exploded and all this like I mean, I don't even know, because it's like 20,000 people dead, but there's so many. We can't look without seeing people with 1, 2, 3 missing. Missing, losing legs and arms and all kinds of shit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just disgusting. But they want us to look at it and say, oh. It's like, that quote, we Orwellian isn't even enough. That quote that you were asked to deny your eyes and ears. It was the party's final but most important request, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like literally you can see it and you can hear it and but yet you're told that it's something else. And that not only that it's something else, but you're bad for even thinking that that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and also they can, get 25 more miles of property to develop.
Damn, they really have it. They have all bases covered. Like they have all bases covered to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think they're going to try to write it out.
Yeah, they have.
Right now, like you're taking the hit, might as well keep on going.
Yeah.
I mean, really, because they're going to take the hit anyway. So it's like it's not like they're going to be like, okay, well, we only half genocided, so they'll give us a pass. I think they're going to hope they can just carry it out and get away with it, and people will just, people will move on to the next thing, or who knows. And yeah, it's true. If they're not forced, if a sizable enough of people don't keep on this and say, no, we're not going to let this slide into the memory hole. Not this time. But it depends. If they win decisively, then that's how that goes. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. Although they made a threat to, to wrap up, but they made some sort of official statement to Hezbollah yesterday, which seemed weird.
Really?
Yeah, basically telling Hezbollah, we want you to move back like 5 miles or something, or 4 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that, and we'll promise that we won't take the property, the land while you're gone, basically.
Wow. Okay.
Well, because of course they want. This just seemed, I don't know who this was for, because I can't see Hezbollah doing this, but basically, because Hezbollah's been having like low level combat. I don't know, because of course Israel has a lot of military right up by the Lebanon border. So Hezbollah there's been skirmishes or attacks between, like, low scale, like not between those areas. And what Israel has said is that they're doing that, and one of the reasons why they're doing that is because they don't want Israel to be able to take all the people they have in the north into Gaza. Yeah. And so, of course, Israel knows this as well, and they want to be able to have a lot of people. They want to be able to take. That's what they want to have. But it just seems like it's just a pretense, because there's no way that Hezbollah is going to retreat from the border when they lost a lot of lives to push Israel out back in, I don't know, it was 2008 or something, 2006 or something. And it's like, you know, it's like, what leverage do you have over them? Why would they? I mean, yeah, they don't want Israel to start bombing Lebanon, but that they think that Israel's just going to say, okay, you guys need to fall back 4 kilometers, and they'll just be like, okay. It's like, they're not Egypt.
True. Yeah. I mean,
not Jordan.
Just Googling. Just Googling it.
But I'd be surprised. I'd be like, I was reading that statement. I'm like, this is like a joke. Like, who? And then I always think, like, who is this for? Because it's not for Hezbollah. So it must be for, I don't know if it's for the Israeli public or is it for Joe Biden? Like, who was this official message for? Because I can just imagine. I mean, obviously, I'm not in their mind, but I'd be like, what?
Right. I already see I see an article by The Hill that says America must plan for Israel's likely 2024 war with Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Another article from the Times of Israel, IDF says it struck Hezbollah missile squad, more sites in Lebanon. I mean,
they've been shooting, but it's been low. It's been I don't know. It's been low key compared to what's going on in Gaza. They've been exchanging fire. They've had exchange the fire, but it's been nothing major. Yeah.
Which is hilarious, because it's like you're shooting missiles into a fucking place. Like, what are you just gonna shoot them into an empty building? Like, I mean, because it says that they struck a missile squad, so I guess they killed some people.
Could be. Yeah, no, I mean, you know, and there's the propaganda thing, because on most cases, if it doesn't suit their narrative, yeah. So when Hezbollah or Hamas does something that can be characterized as terrorism, then the media will show that 24/7. But when they're fighting face to face when it's soldier to soldier, then they don't show any of that. So you have these things being leaked online and they'll be like, Hezbollah takes out, you know, such and such on the northern border, the front, and they're like, Hamas takes out this or that, and they'll show it, and they have some sort of cam, and they're just like, you know, they're popping up out of their tunnel, and they're going and they're placing something on a tank or whatever, and then they're coming back, and then when it's successful, they show it, so because Hezbollah won't show that, so the other media won't show it either. But there's been low level exchanges, yeah. So it's not like yeah. So all I know is that the strategy is that Hezbollah has said that, and who knows what this means. They said if it looks like Hamas will fall, then we will get involved more. Then we will have to get involved more, because we can't let we can't let that happen to what they call the axis of resistance, to make fun of the axis of evil. They call themselves the axis of resistance. But he said until then, you know, we are, you know, we are, you know, Israel can't withdraw. They have to keep a certain amount of their military positioned in the north because we're here. And it's true, because Israel also has to realize that even though who knows how invincible they still think they are or not, that they know that they're vulnerable now. So if someone was going to do something, want to do something big, like take over some of their territory or try to, now would be the time to do it. and so they can't. So they're in a rock and a hard place. They need their military, the people and the stuff they have, targeting or facing towards Israel, or not Israel, sorry, Lebanon, but they can't because then they have to assume that Hezbollah will use that opportunity to do whatever it is they want to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just yeah. And you have people in Netanyahu's cabinet, the religious right we talked about yesterday, who think that Lebanon should be part of Israel. And people in Lebanon know that there's people who say that in the cabinet. So, it's which doesn't get reported here either. But anyway, we'll see. But I saw that today. I was just like, what is this? Is this a pretext for them to start bombing them? They're gonna go this now and be like, look, we told you that you need, like, we told you what you need to do in your own land and you didn't do it, so now we're going to do this. I mean, who knows? They're could be. Or maybe Biden's even gone further off the rocker and he's like, go ahead, we'll help you. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe all the bands getting back together and everyone that went into Iraq and Afghanistan is going to want to take part in beating up on these para-state actors.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I can definitely see that.
Anyway, okay, Tony. It's late. I'm tired. We go on and on, but that's because you're so lovely to talk to. We can just go on and on. But of course, then I'll think, oh, wait a minute, we're recording.
Well, what time is it over there? It has to be what, 12 a.m.?
No, 1. It's almost 1.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, but anyway,
you're wide awake.
No, I'm not actually. I'm not. I'm fading.
You're not? Oh, okay.
I'm like, there's part of my mind for the last half hour saying you should be quiet and end this thing. Anyway, not that people can pop in and out. This is the early days. This is the early days. This is the first cut. This is the early days of the Morbid Symptoms podcast with Tara and LA Tony. We're new, man. We're trying things out, seeing what fits, seeing what doesn't itch. Okay. All right, Tony. Have a good day. I will, I'll see you next time. So this has been the Morbid Symptoms podcast. I'm Tara Van Dyke with LA Tony, my esteemed co-host, and we've been talking about the manufacturing of consent and how the ever-present "Do you condemn Hamas?" question figures into that. Take care, everyone, and we'll catch you next time. See you later, Tony.